Boker Tov, a final halakha with regards to Purim. Working. Is a person allowed to go to work and go about their regular business activities on the day of Purim? So the Gemara discusses this, and interestingly, the Gemara points out to the Megillah that we find a discrepancy. When Mordechai and Esther instituted the festival of Purim for future generations, because at first it says in chapter 9 of the Megillah that they instituted to make them days of mishteh, of feast. That's our Seudat Purim, which we've discussed, and simcha and joy, and Yom Tov. Yom Tov means it's forbidden to do work. Like if it's a Yom Tov, then just like on Yom Tov, it's of course forbidden to go to work. So too would be Purim as well. But then later on in the Megillah, it says just days of mishteh and simcha, and it omits Yom Tov. And so the Gemara picks up on this discrepancy and says that what happened is that it didn't happen. Although perhaps the initial thought of Mordechai and Esther was to make them full Yamim Tovim, together with the Mishteh, in reality, this was never accepted, and they only became Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha, days of festivity and of joy. But the element of Yom Tov, which would mean that work is forbidden on these days, was not accepted. Which means that we're allowed to drive around and write and do everything, which if it was Yom Tov wouldn't be able to happen. But yet the Gemara says a story about one of the Hachamim who got very upset with someone who was working on Purim, and the Gemara asks, why is this the case? If it is that a person is allowed to work on Purim, then why was he upset? And the Gemara says, because even though the halacha is the one is allowed to do melacha on Purim, if it's been accepted, if the minhag of a certain locality is not to do work on Purim, then it's forbidden. And therefore he told him off for doing so. And indeed, this is the accepted halacha amongst the Rishonim and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, that strictly speaking, work is permissible to be done on Purim. However, in a place where the minhag is not to do work on Purim, it's forbidden to do so because of the custom of the place. And already the Rishonim wrote, and this is basically the accepted practice nowadays, what the poskim write, that the minhag now is that work is not done on Purim, which would mean that if a person has the ability to take off on Purim day, a person runs his or her own business, really one should refrain from engaging in that business or going to work on that day if it's possible for the person to do so. Of course, if there's hefsed gadol, if there's a loss involved, a great loss involved, and the person has already taken off enough from work for the actual Yamim Tovim, and it's going to be too much to have to take off on Purim, then there's what to allow to continue to go to work. But really, in the first instance, during the day of Purim, one needs to try to ensure that one doesn't do their regular work day work and their regular business. Of course, if it's a business which has got to do with Purim, such as food, drink, or merchandise with regards to Purim, then of course that's permissible. That's all part of the simcha of Purim, and that's fine. But otherwise, it should be refrained. It should be added. The Rambam writes, the Shulchan Aruch brings it down as well, that even in places where a person can do work, you don't see success from that work. And so really, it's futile what the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, are telling us to work on Purim. Again, if one has no choice, then that's something else. So to summarize, and when we're talking about work, we're talking about mundane work, activities, not writing or something small like that. We're talking about proper work, a person's fixed work. So to summarize in conclusion, strictly speaking, work on Purim is mutar. However, the minhag has evolved that we do not work on Purim, our regular business or work activities. And if a person has the ability to not to work, then one should do so. If one doesn't have, then of course it's permissible to go to work on Purim. And all of this applies to the day of Purim. On the night of Purim, there's a debate about it, but it's clear that the minhag is, there's no minhag to forbid it, and therefore it's permissible to do business, to do work on Purim night. On the day, however, is, as we've said, a person should attempt to refrain from doing so.